How do I use the power of competition to break my plateaus? Great question. We've got answers. Welcome back to the Vegrepreneur Podcast, a podcast for vegan entrepreneurs who want to change the world and build a mass movement around what they believe in. I'm your host, Oz, and today's episode features Jake Thompson, who is the CEO of Compete Every Day. He's a public speaker, but more importantly, he helps people use the power of competition to reach that next level because many of us are walking around with limiting beliefs and mindsets which kind of dictate not only our internal expectations of ourselves, but our self-image, which kind of prevents us and blockades us from reaching our fullest potential. So if you find yourself in these shoes, this is definitely an episode you want to be listening to, packed filled with rich information and really great actionable steps that you can start taking right now to reach the next level. If anyone watches your videos, they know that your energy is high, your fluence is high. A big question that many of us have is like, where do you get that energy from? What is fueling your drive? And more importantly, what are you grateful for?
Man, I'm grateful for the opportunity to get to do what I do. Honestly, the energy and the fuel comes from the fact that I've found what my purpose is. And I love getting to do it each and every day. And honestly, the impact that I can make with individuals, talking to people about what competition can do for them, what it means to compete every day in their life, what that could look like, and starting to see that spark, and those wheels turn of people going from, man, I don't know if I can do anything like that. That's not for me, to maybe I can do this. Maybe I do have an opportunity to achieve my goals, to win. Seeing those transformations and changes, that fuels me. And so for me, the opportunity to be able to encourage someone with a word, with a post, with a story each and every day, it has to fire you up because you're getting to make some impacts that go well beyond just the limited time I have here on earth. So that's what fires me up every morning. That and a good cup of coffee.
Oh yeah, baby. And well, I guess it's easy to look at people who are fluent like yourself and just say, okay, they've had it all their life. They've been like that all their life. This is just a state that they're continuously in. But are you able to share with us any moment particularly where you remember you were not at that state where you're living your purpose?
Oh yeah, that really is kind of my journey in a nutshell. I went to college here in Texas. Growing up, I thought I'd be the next sports agent. I wanted to represent NFL players. I wanted to be Jerry Maguire, and so I spent college and part of grad school interning with an agency, thinking that's what I wanted. I was making calls, recruiting guys, and really about 2 weeks left in grad school, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And so it was a little bit at a crossroads. That was the fall of 2008. U.S. economy was in the tank. It was a
Mhm.
really tough position for me to get any kind of job. And so I started freelancing, graphic design, marketing strategy, some online marketing strategy in its earlier days, just helping companies I would talk to, see what their needs were, see where they were having problems, hitting a wall, and then try to provide some solutions. And from that, ended up building a pretty good consulting business. But what I found was I still wasn't very fulfilled with my work. It wasn't to where I hated what I did, but I was struggling with the idea of something more. And for me, what that looked like was, I compare it to, I was building this awesome sandcastle. Every client I added etched in a new design on the side. Every new toy I bought with money from the clients, added a new layer. But we all know what happens to sandcastles, and that they wash away. And I was really struggling with the fact that my life, my legacy, what I'd been working on was nothing but for me. I wasn't trying to impact anyone. I wasn't trying to go beyond just adding another zero to my bank account. And so I went through a little bit of a struggle period of wanting to redefine who I was, what I was about, and start working on shifting my perspective on what I can do for me to what I can do for some other people, and how can I impact them. And so I toyed with ideas for a while until the phrase compete every day continued to stand out, just from a sports background, a very competitive mindset background. It seemed to resonate with me. And so that was early or late 2010, and I spent about 6, 8 months tinkering with projects. Still hadn't quite found what I wanted to do with it. I just had this message that I knew I wanted to impact people with. Ultimately, ended up launching it into an apparel brand in 2011, and just kind of have grown it from there. But I very much remember the days of not knowing what I wanted to do, and struggling a little bit with it. But it's all in the matter of that perspective that you keep in terms of, I might not know what I want to do or what I'm passionate about doing now, but I'm going to keep trying things. I'm going to keep doing things. I'm going to keep moving until I do discover it. And I think that's where a big hang up for a lot of people are today is, if they don't know, they don't do anything, versus starting to make moves and test and figure it out, because that's really the only way. I figured it out on the way. And I think most people that I talk to, it's the only way they've figured it out either.
Oh yeah, and again, the medium always changes. It's always a vision that stays put, but the way you're going to do it is always going to change. When did you realize competition was something that you needed inside your life to grow as an individual?
Yeah, so for me, it was something. I was big into sports growing up. I was always a smaller athlete. I wasn't ever the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, but I like to think that I would outwork everyone, and I try to have the biggest heart. And I knew from a competitive standpoint that was my one advantage, is that I was hungrier than anyone else I was going to go against for my position, for the sport. And so for me, I carried a lot of that through youth, high school, early adulthood, of this competitive mindset of, I'm going to outwork you and outsmart you because it's the only advantage I have. And the older I got, the more I started to see, in a sense, how if I looked at competition from me versus you, how draining it was. It's a constant comparison game.
Yeah.
I love the idea of the adrenaline rush and the spike that you get with competition, and just the opportunity to step outside of your comfort zone, because at that point it's the only opportunity to see what you're really made of. It's not the limits that we tend to settle for, it's the actual, what can I push myself to do. And so as I got older and I looked more at the comparison game, I realized that I needed to really shift a perspective. And that ultimately came into the idea of compete every day. Is it's not a me versus you mindset. I'm not trying to be a competitor against you. I'm trying to be a competitor against my best from yesterday. Because at that point, if I'm focused on my lane, if I'm focused on what I'm doing, it's everything under my control. It's when we make the mistake of starting to look and compare ourselves to everyone we see on social media or out in the world. And honestly, we don't ever know the true story behind the scenes. And it's exhausting when we do that, because we don't know who they know, where they come from, how much money they have, how much they're actually making versus what they're showing. It's just a constant rat race where, if you're only focused on what you're doing, how can I improve on what I did the day before? That's a battle you can win every single day, is that competing against yourself to do just a little bit more, be a little bit better. It's like a track star in any athlete that runs track. When you get and take off sprinting, you're only focused on your finish line and your lane. The moment you start looking to the left, to the right, behind you, your body slows down. You physically cannot run at top speed if you're turned looking all behind you, looking beside you, trying to figure out where everyone else is. It's only by focusing at your end finish line, pressing forward and running your own race, that you're able to hit your optimum top speed. And so ultimately, I found, for me and for a lot of people I talk to, it's the same thing that applies with life. Comparing yourself to everyone is an exhausting game that you can't do every day. It just physically and mentally will wear you out. But competing with yourself is something you can absolutely do every day.
Oh yeah, man, that's fire. When you shift your perspective into that point of game where you're only competing against yourself, then you're just creating a whole new game just around yourself, and there's no competition against the others, right? Even though that person may be bigger, stronger, you're still faster in your own way, and you're still able to dominate that part of the game.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's everything that you control. And you don't control other people, you don't control any of those outcomes, but you 100% control your efforts your dedication, your determination, and your drive. It's funny, Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit, talks about the formulas for success. And through all this scientific study and research studies, they started looking at it. And talent to a degree weighs into the equation, but the unique aspect is effort and persistence weigh more. It's almost actually double, as it counts as much, excuse me, it counts twice as much as talent. So an individual that's half as talented but twice as driven over the course of a period will outwork and far succeed the person that's more talented that doesn't have that same drive. And so that's ultimately being that competitor against yourself, is because you control that effort. Talent you're born with, you don't control, but heart and effort, we all control how much we put out in the world every day.
And what would you, let's say we take a young individual, they're 18, 20, going in their early 20s, they're into getting into the game of entrepreneurship, but they've learned all their life that you should stay away from competition, right? And you should kind of just go with the flow, maybe get an employer, and are trying to shift that mindset. What would you invite them to do firstly to kind of get back into the game of competition and grow?
Man, it's like the bane of my existence when I hear people talk about how competition is bad, because I mean, it dates back to the Greeks, and you and I talked about this before we hopped on the call. Is back in the Greeks had a word called eratos that they used when referring about competition. It's the idea that competition reveals your greatest self. So it's only through competing that you're able to find out how good of a business owner you are, how great of a dad you can be, how good of a friend you are. Like it's only by putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, stepping out of that comfort zone and pushing those limitations, that you're really able to see what you're capable of. And for many of us, we tend to settle for what we think we can do than what we actually can do. And what we think we can do is always less than what we're truly capable of. And so for someone that's sitting in that position, that's heard time and time and time again that, man, competing's bad. Competing is done every day. I mean, if you look at an office setup, you have teams. Yeah, sales teams, they may have some fun challenges where they're competing against each other to see who can do more sales. But as a unit, they're collaborating together as one unit to compete against other companies. But they're only focused on how can we do better today? How can we drive more sales? How can I make more phone calls? And so if you're struggling from the mindset of starting to embrace the idea of competing, just look at it from the perspective of how can I be better today than I was yesterday? Take the word competition off the table. It's really the idea of how can I do something better today than I did the day before. And so for me, one of the easiest ways that I always recommend people starting is just to get like a 5-minute journal, or I use a best self journal. And what it allows you to do, among a number of other things from a productivity standpoint, is you track what are your goals for the day. And so each morning or the night before, you're going to write down, what are my big 3 goals for the day that I want to accomplish? And then when you get to the end of the day, you're going to write down, what are my 3 wins? What are 3 things that I hit? Did I hit all my goals? Did I eat healthy like I wanted to? If I'm trying to exercise, did I make it to the gym, or did I go on a long walk? And then you write down, what are your 3 lessons for the day? Where did I fall short? And so you write down those things of where I fell short. And when you're looking at that at night, you're putting it in your head, okay, not to beat yourself up, but here's the 3 things I learned today that I need to do better tomorrow. And so the next morning when you wake up and you've got the book and you're going to open it up and you're going to look at those 3 lessons from yesterday. Okay, I didn't manage my time that well yesterday. I found myself surfing Facebook or playing on Instagram instead of actually doing the work on Instagram that I meant to do when I first logged on. I got to be aware of that. I need to be cognizant of that. So today I'm going to be very intentional when I get onto that platform of what I'm doing. And so it helps you to build on it so that the next day you're not writing down the exact same lesson. You're saying, hey, instead of wasting 2 hours today, I only ended up catching myself wasting about 45 minutes. I'm getting better. You've got that little win. And so tomorrow, the next day, you're going to cut that down to 30 or 20 minutes. And then eventually you'll find out where you're really productive throughout the day. But it's only by challenging yourself a little bit and looking at what you did incorrectly or you fell short of where you wanted to be that you can improve on. And I think that's what a big part of competition is and why I do a lot of talks around it in sport is there's a winner and there's a loser. And it's only sometimes by going to that position where you lost the game, you missed the shot, you missed a pass, that you can learn what I need to do better next time so that I can hit that mark and hit that goal. And the same applies to our life.
And you as an individual, since you have so much experience in the concept of self competition, do you still find yourself repeating this practice?
Oh, I mean, in terms of writing down stuff daily,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm pretty adamant about it. I've become, the more I've done it, the more self-aware I am of it. Because when I started out, I would catch myself, if I'm working from home one day, I would just not be as productive. And I wouldn't be quite able to put my finger on, well, why am I not being as productive? And so I started tracking notes of when I was taking breaks and things like that. And so now, if I catch myself on a day where I've got a bunch of things piling on top of each other, in the back of my mind and actively thinking, I'm becoming aware of, okay, this is a priority. Okay, next time this is not a priority. I need to cut this. I don't need to do this. And so I'm making mental notes as well as notes in my book. But yeah, the best self journal I order quite a bit. I actually gave some to my team as a Christmas gift last year before, after I first started finding it, because I've been using it. Because it's incredibly helpful for me, because it forces you to plot out your entire day. But it also, what I love about it is it keeps your perspective in check. It reminds you of wins that you had during the day, even small wins, which gives you that positive boost. And then it helps you keep track of lessons, because I don't want to look at the lessons I learned yesterday or the day before to be the same ones that I had 2 years ago. That means I'm not growing as an individual. I'm not making strides. And so tracking that is a huge way to just continue the growth that I'm wanting to have professionally and personally.
Mhm. And taking back the concept of competing against yourself, this may be an anecdote, but I still feel, talking to other people, it's relevant to them as well. I felt that when I had someone to look up to, that was maybe, let's say I was learning guitar. I remember back in Sec 1 when I was 13, there was this guy that was way better than me in guitar. And because of that gap, because I was able to be with him almost every day, that forced me to kind of have the motivation to beat him. So how would you tie that into the concept of self-competition?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good to challenge yourself. I think it's always good to have those people that you look at and that are doing things well that you want to emulate. Like, if you have that individual who's ahead of you and you look up to, and they do the things that you want to do, they do it really well. It gives you the perfect example to study. What are they doing? How are they doing this?
Hmm.
What can I learn and start applying? Because where the lessons are in talking to the individual or following and seeing their work and how I can emulate what they've done. But where we fall into the trap is we start comparing ourselves. And what we're not doing is we're not allowing ourselves the space or the grace to understand that that person could be 10 years ahead of you, 5 years ahead of you. The only difference between you and them is that they've had 5 to 10 more years honing their craft, doing their work, or some of their contacts. Like, how did they do that? But what you can always do is learn from that and challenge yourself to try to implement. Say, okay, I'm not going to compare myself to this entrepreneur. Okay, that would be crazy, because this entrepreneur is da 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 da. But how did this entrepreneur succeed? What did they do? What are the steps they took, the work they put in? How can I take pieces of that and challenge myself to get out of my comfort zone, get out of what I'm doing, and apply some of those to learn from them? And so that's where I feel that the challenge is maintaining the mindset not to compare yourself to them, because you're on two very different paths and probably at two very different starting lines. But there's lessons to be had from there. I had a call, man, this was probably a year ago. There was a company that entrepreneur out of Texas, or West Texas, had a t-shirt company, was starting out. I think she was in her like first 18 months, maybe 2 years, but I still think she was about a year and a half in. and she was asking me questions of like, we see you everywhere, you're always at these events, like I feel like I'm doing this wrong, what, can you help me? And I'm asking them questions of what they're doing, and I just kind of chuckled. I was like, the biggest difference between you and I is I have a 5-year head start. So like the things you're worried about now were the same things I was worried about 5 years ago. And I did this and this and this, and I kept doing this and kept doing this. And so that's it. That's what we always forget is social media makes us believe it's an even playing field that we're losing on, when in all reality, we're not. There's a lot of people that they started earlier. Cool. How do I catch up? How do I do what they did and implement it? And so that's my best advice for them, is not to compare, but to take lessons and study what they did to get there, and then challenge yourself to try it.
Oh yeah. What's the number one way people can reach out to you, connect with you, and learn even more about competition?
Man, I think the best way is probably how we connected. I'm most active on Instagram, and you can find me at Life is Worth Competing For. My companies compete every day. And then my website is just my name, jakeathompson.com. I've started to put out more and more content on how do you train your mind a little bit better on the power of competition? How do you utilize it? And then season 2 of our podcast is getting ready to kick off next month, where we've got a bunch of mindset coaches and coaches and athletes talking about how does competition work in everyday life outside of sports, off the playing field, and how can we harness it to be absolutely better.
Man, it's all about a nugget a day, always taking one foot for the next every single day. No hurry, no pause. And if you were able to do so with this podcast episode today, what I'd like for you to do is take a screenshot, share the link, and give it to one friend who needs to listen to the power of competition. This is how we're going to grow the movement of vegan entrepreneurship. This is how we're going to inspire millions. Yourself, myself, and this podcast is just a medium to do so. If you did find value, please share it to someone who needs to listen to it. Make sure you take 20 seconds to write down anything that you picked up on inside this episode, and stay awesome. Keep killing it.